Hello, friends. I'm just making sure that all of the techie stuff is what it's supposed to be doing. Um, I'm not great with the technology stuff, so that's the part that makes me the most nervous. I was joking on my Facebook earlier that I went to school for music and performance and everything. Just making sure that techie stuff. And that's why I'm not good at techie stuff. I had the volume on my iPad. But I was joking on my Facebook page that I went to school for music performance, and the only thing that I really am using at this point in my life is the nervousness before I start to perform. So, hello everyone. Um, I'm Emily Midgett. I've been part of the Pinkfresh studio design team for I don't know how many years. But they asked me if I would be interested in doing a live demonstration for the new liquid watercolors that we are releasing later this month. And these new liquid watercolors, they've been a long time coming. They're part of the reason that they've been such a long time coming is because Pinkfresh was testing for perfect matches to the absolutely gorgeous Pinkfresh Studio ink line. They wanted to make sure that these watercolors would work seamlessly with the colors of the ink line. And the Pinkfresh Studio ink color palette is top notch. I mean, they're such unique colors in my opinion. And I'm looking at my wall of ink that I have, and the Pinkfresh Studio color palette is so vibrant and there's just so many unique colors. And so one of the things that I want to share with you guys are some of the things that I think make the liquid watercolors really unique. I want to share with you the reasons why we would choose liquid watercolors over just kind of using your dye reinkers, your dye ink pad reinkers. Because they're not all the same. And then I also wanted to share with you a couple of techniques and some tricks that I have found in using these watercolors. As I've been working with them, there is a learning curve, as there is with every coloring medium. You have to practice. The more you use the coloring medium, the more comfortable you will get with the little quirks that every coloring medium has. So Heather also wanted me to make sure that I shared with you that we are going to give away all three sets. There are three different colorways of these Pinkfresh liquid watercolors. We're going to give away all three sets plus a package of the new vegan Pinkfresh Studio watercolor paper. So if you leave comments, you will be automatically entered to win that giveaway. And Heather is in the comment section moderating, and so she will be able to hopefully answer any questions if I miss it. I've got my iPad over there so that I can hopefully try to catch questions if you guys have them. And I'll take a look at that periodically just to see if there's anything that I've missed. But Heather will announce that in the comment section, and then I will come back here and I will announce it at the end, the winner. So let's get started playing with some watercolors, and I want to just share some different things with you. So let me do the techie stuff that I'm not very good at. Sorry. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So I am looking at my iPad just to make sure that I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing, that I'm live the way I'm supposed to be live. All right, let me just kind of maneuver this a little bit. I bumped it right before I turned it on, and so my camera got all wonky. Okay, so here are the liquid watercolors. They are just really beautiful, beautiful colors. We have jewel tones, pastels, and classics. And they are in the Pinkfresh color range. They are really great matches for the Pinkfresh color range. Now, I will say I do not have candy apple for the classics because, in testament to their pursuit of perfection, Um, they are reworking the candy apple. It will be ready for the release at the end of the month. We're going live with this release on the 24th of this month. And so I don't have the perfect match of the candy apple at this point, but I do have everything else. So I have created some swatch cards. This is what I like to do anytime I'm working with a new medium. I like to go ahead and play with them just to kind of get an idea of what I am working with. This is the jewel tone set, and you can see the gorgeous range of colors. And one of the things that I really like about these liquid watercolors is consistency. If you are like me and you like to kind of micromanage, if you like to really have a lot of control over your watercoloring and the specific colors on your projects, liquid watercolors are a great way to achieve that, because you can, each drop that you get from these liquid watercolors will be consistent. That is something that is different about the formulation from a dye ink pad re-inker. Those colors are not, those liquids are not formulated to be used with water so that they can be diluted. The colors will separate. That, you know, you've got your red, yellow, and blue that make up all colors. Those colors that make up those primary colors that make up your dye re-inkers, they will separate when you add water to them. They're great for some, you know, very basic techniques, but if you really want to do watercoloring, liquid watercolors will serve you much better. So I just took, these are all done, all of my swatch cards are done on the Pinkfresh Studio watercolor paper. This is the watercolor paper, and it is vegan. It's a very nice, crisp, bright white. You can see that it's got a little bit of texture on one side, and then the other side is fairly smooth, so it's great for stamping. It's great for hot foiling. I have done lots of successful hot foiling. I've also done lots of successful letterpress with it. So it's a very versatile paper. It's very nice and sturdy. It's 140 pounds. It's cold pressed. So again, you get that lovely texture that I personally prefer for my watercoloring. And it's a really nice crisp white. So you get 15 sheets. It's 9 by 12, I think, is the size. And so what I did for these three colors, these three packages of watercolors, I just did, this is a 4-inch by 9-inch. So I divided each one sheet of the watercolor paper into 3 equal sections, and then I just used a Sharpie to create little areas for me to put the colors so that I have a color reference for later. One of the things that I really like about liquid watercolors is the ability to make custom colors consistently. So again, control freak here. I like to be able to make consistent colors when I am working with my watercolors. I do not like having to guess at mixtures, which is one of my downfalls with traditional watercolors. Is I have a difficult time creating the exact same mixture again, because it is really, it's kind of guesswork. You just have to kind of pick up the color and mix it and hope that you're getting close to the same color that you mixed before. And so one of the things with liquid watercolors that I really enjoy is that you can kind of create almost recipes of your colors, and you can use, you can create a little recipe card almost. If you find a color blend that you really, really enjoy, you can create a little recipe card to use as a reference later. So I'm just going to do some techniques, just some very basic watercolor techniques. I'm going to show you these liquid watercolors. Now, Raspberry Bliss is probably one of my top favorite Pinkfresh Studio colors in general. So here you get this lovely little bottle, and the case that these come in is very, very high quality. You can see how nice and sturdy these are, and they store beautifully. They're nice and compact, and you don't have to worry about them taking up too much space. So I'm just going to squeeze some of this watercolor out onto my palette. I've got a ceramic palette that I purchased on, I don't remember where I purchased this one. I have a little collection of watercolor palettes. But so let me make sure that I have not missed any questions. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm not missing any questions yet. Okay. So what we're going to do, I want to show you guys just how these work with a plain dry brush. Okay. With liquid watercolors, the amount of water that you have, the amount of moisture and liquid that you have on your brush is going to be the key. That's going to be the game changer for your painting. So I just have, this is just a panel of the Pinkfresh Studio watercolor paper. And then I'm going to, this is a completely dry brush. So this is dry brush. I'm going to dip this into my palette, my watercolor palette that I've added some Raspberry Bliss to my palette. And I'm just going to paint that on there. And you can see how beautifully, beautifully vibrant that color is. It's great just with the dry brush. But we're going to take some, I've got my brush kind of wet now. It's got quite a bit of moisture on it. We're going to add that color down onto our paper, and then we're going to move that color. I've cleaned my brush between each, before I've put it back down onto the paper, and I dab it on my stamp chamois. If you've watched any of my watercolor videos before, you know that a stamp chamois is one of the things that I can't watercolor without, because I use it to dab excess water off of my paintbrush. So you can see how vibrant, the difference in the vibrancy between the dry brush application and the damp brush application. So now I'm going to put a lot of water. I've got this paintbrush is pretty well saturated with water. It's like dripping with water. And I'm going to pick up some more of that color. And you can see that it starts off even lighter. The amount of water that you add to these liquid watercolors is going to completely change the level of vibrancy that you have on your paper. And something else to remember with watercolors in general is that they will most likely dry a little bit lighter than how vibrant they are when you apply them. So if you're wanting super, super, super saturated color, make sure you have as little moisture on your brush as possible. I like to use my stamp chamois, and I just kind of roll my paintbrush on my stamp chamois to make it as dry as I possibly can. It's not completely dry, but it's pretty close. So you can see this is my fairly dry paintbrush, and this is just completely concentrated color. There's no real extra water in there. And then I can move that color around with my damp paintbrush. And again, cleaning your paintbrush, dabbing that excess water, that excess moisture off of your paintbrush is going to be the key to success with these watercolors. Because again, as with every coloring medium, there is going to be a level of a learning curve that you're going to need to practice with them. The more you practice with them, the more comfortable you will be. Okay, so now let's go ahead. I had notes of what I wanted to do. Oh, I wanted to show you some color mixtures. Okay, so go back to grade school when you were in art class and you were talking about the different ways to mix colors using those red, yellow, and blue. You would mix varying degrees of intensity for red and blue. Say you would mix more red with a little bit of blue to create kind of a red violet. You would mix lots of blue with a little bit of red to create a deep blue violet. So you can use that, using that kind of color theory, you can create your own custom mixtures. So I'm going to take, this is Stargazer. You can see the color right there. This is Stargazer. It's a nice deep blue. This is in the Jewel Tones pack. And then I'm going to take that Raspberry Bliss again, and I'm going to shake them up a little bit, and I'm going to mix. We're going to create a blue violet. So I'm going to mix this over a little bit. 2 drops of the Stargazer with 1 drop of Raspberry Bliss. Oh, I got 2 drops of Raspberry Bliss. So we'll just do another drop of Stargazer. 1 more. We want to get the proportions right. That's the main goal. Okay, so this is a number 6 silver black velvet brush. This is my go-to paintbrush for basically any watercoloring that I'm doing. I will say, I know that there are lots of people in our crafting community who really like water brushes. I would not recommend water brushes for use with these liquid watercolors because you don't have a ton of control with water brushes. The water gets kind of released based on how you're holding your, the direction that you're holding your watercolor brush, depending on how much pressure you're putting down, how much you're squeezing it. So it's kind of, it's a little, for me personally, it's a little bit too finicky, a little bit too random. I don't recommend a water brush with these liquid watercolors. But so back to our mixing. So we've got 3 drops of Stargazer and 2 drops of Raspberry Bliss. And I'm just going to mix these 2 together. You can see already on my palette, what a gorgeous shade of just intense, like regal royal purple. So we're going to put that onto our watercolor paper. Isn't that gorgeous? And the nice thing about it is if you make notes on your swatch cards, on your, you can even make a little recipe box of different color combinations that you like for mixing. You can create recipe cards for your watercoloring. So you could create the same color 50 different times as long as you have the proportions correct. So now we're going to add a little water to this. And I'm going to show you what it looks like as kind of a pastel version. See how lovely, and it looks almost like a hydrangea purple. And you can see how that color is consistent. There is no separation between the colors as I add more water to it. That is one of the advantages of the liquid watercolors over another medium. There's no granulation. They're completely translucent. They will be consistent for you every time, okay? So let's just see what that Stargazer looks like by itself, just so that you can have a comparison, because we've got the Raspberry Bliss on the paper already. So we'll just go ahead and add some Stargazer on there just so that you can see. And that is something else, another tip that I would say. Dabbing your excess water off of your brush will give you more control over where the paint is going, how much water is being released. So that will control the level of intensity of your watercolor. So you can see this is Raspberry Bliss and Stargazer mixed together to create this color right here. And this is the pastel version. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more intensity here. Isn't that fun? I think that's just so much fun to be able to create completely custom colors. And Pinkfresh has such a beautiful range of colors to begin with. And then you add in the ability to mix and match. I think that is just so much fun. So now we're going to play with a couple of different techniques that I really enjoy with liquid watercolors. Let me go ahead and make sure that there are no questions. Louise asked if the chamois is dry. No, the chamois is damp. If the chamois is dry, it won't really soak up the watercolor because they get kind of hard. Like, I don't know if you've ever used one for like washing a car. Once all of the moisture is evaporated out of it, it gets hard like a piece of like leather that has become, that has been gotten wet and kind of left out to dry. So this is, I get it wet under my faucet and then I squeeze it dry so that it's it's just lightly damp. But because it absorbs water so well, it doesn't, it takes a lot of watercoloring for me to have to go and rinse this out and squeeze it out again to get it damp again. Watercolors are not being sold individually. They are being sold as a group, as groups of 12. Let me see if I've got any other questions. So when you when you drop some of your color onto your palette, whether it is a ceramic palette like this, whether it is, also got just a little plastic plate that I got in the dollar section at Target. I like this palette particularly because it has these little wells, so it kind of keeps the watercolors in their own little area. And that way there's not any mixing where I don't want there to be any mixing. But they will dry. The water will evaporate out of them. The moisture will evaporate out of them because they are dye-based, they're water-based. They will kind of get concentrated onto your palette, especially if you live in like a really dry climate, like in the desert or something like that. They will become kind of concentrated on there, and you can just reactivate them with a damp paintbrush. You drop a little bit of water on there, and oh, that was something else I wanted to share with you. This is just a little water dropper bottle that I got from Amazon, and you can use this also to create your own mixes. So if you want to make a really pastel version of your stargazer, put a couple of drops of water on your palette, and then put some stargazer in there, just one drop. Sorry, I totally forgot about that. I wasn't paying attention to my notes. But so that's another way that you can get totally consistent colors. So now we could even add more water. So that was one drop of stargazer to 3 drops of water. So I'm just going to add 3 more drops of water. And that's going to give us an even more pastel version. So the amount of water that you have is the key to achieving a wide range of concentrations of color. So this is solid. This is with a dry paintbrush, as dry as you can get it. This is with a little bit of dampness to the paintbrush. This is with a very wet paintbrush. This is our color mixture. So we've got Raspberry Bliss and Stargazer mixed together to create this lovely shade of purple. This is with water mixed with 1 single drop of Stargazer. And you can see there's a lot of color there. So you could get that consistent for an entire project practically. Okay, so I want to move on to a different technique. I have a few different techniques to share with you guys today. So something else that we're going to talk about is wet on dry versus wet on wet. So wet on dry means that you are just basically taking your paint, which is wet because it is liquid watercolor. You're picking it up with your paintbrush and you're putting it on dry cardstock, dry watercolor paper. This is what we've been doing this whole time. That is the technique that it is. That is the technical name for it. I did not go to school for art, so if somebody is more knowledgeable about the technical terminology than me in the comments, feel free to leave any of that, because I'm always happy to learn ways to sound a little bit more like I know what I'm doing rather than just being completely self-taught. So you can see this is wet on dry. So this is wet watercolor on dry watercolor cardstock. So now I'm going to take, this is a number 8 brush, and I'm just going to get it nice and wet with this water. And I'm going to spread some of this water on my watercolor paper. Make it nice and saturated. I don't know if you guys can see how saturated that is. It's shiny, so it's pretty well saturated. So now we're going to take more of our Raspberry Bliss and just drop that on there. And you can see how that color is blooming. When watercolor touches moisture on your paper, it will automatically spread. Watercolor will seek water. It will seek moisture. So that is one other key to working with these liquid watercolors. I'm going to do some painting on an image in a little bit after we get done showing these techniques, but this is something that you want to keep in mind when you're painting these images, is that if you lay down wet color on an area that is still wet, that color is going to spread, it's going to bloom, it's going to kind of mix together. So that is something to keep in mind. If you're trying to achieve a very specific look, try to keep your wet sections separate. It's what I preach on doing no line coloring, no line watercoloring. It's very important to keep your wet sections apart from each other, because that wet on wet, that's going to cause those blooms. That's going to cause your edges to not be as crisp. So you can see how nice and crisp and smooth those edges are here, and how they kind of have almost a tie-dye effect on this wet on wet. Let me make sure there's no questions that I've missed. I'm trying to read quickly. Gina K, there was a question. Marcia asked where to get the chamois. Gina K and Lawn Fawn, I believe, both offer, it's called a stamp chamois. This one particularly, I just got in the automotive section at Walmart or AutoZone or someplace like that. I don't remember where. The palette I will try to share in my stories on Instagram if you want to look there. I believe it's called Pottery by Eleni. She's from Pacific Northwest. Let's see. What brush do I typically use? I typically use a silver black velvet number 6 brush. It's got a nice crisp point so I can really get into those nooks and crannies, but it also has enough width that I can do larger areas as well. If I'm going to do like wet on wet like here, I'm going to use my number 8 brush. So that's going to lead us into my next technique that I wanted to share with you. So now we're going to do an ombre background. So let's switch to a different color combination. I really love purple, pink, purple, and blue. A lot of my projects, I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of my projects center around those 3 colors because they blend nicely together. But again, going back to our grade school color mixing, we can do that with lots of different colors. And one of the nice things about these watercolors, it's very difficult to make a muddy, unpleasant mixture. The only way to really get mud is if you mix like purple and green or pink and green. So just avoid those combinations and you'll be fine. Let me make sure I'm not missing any other questions. Once the colors are dry, if you wet them again, will they reactivate? Let's take a look. So these are pretty dry, especially that one. Let's take a look with a damp paintbrush and see. They will reactivate. It's not as, the color does not move as easily if the watercolor has dried completely on your cardstock, on your watercolor paper. You can see that the pastel version moves a little bit better. The diluted version moves a little bit more easily, even after it has dried. But like if you drop water on there and let it sit for just a second, it's going to activate that color. Pick that up. And you can see there's kind of a little water droplet there where the watercolor reactivated by that, from that moisture. Beth asked, what is the difference between wet watercolors and dry palettes of watercolor colors? The binders are different. With like a palette of the little watercolor cubes like you would get from Sennelier or Daniel Smith, the binders are different. Some of them use like honey as a binder. I'm not 100% sure on the technical aspects of what those are made from, but these are dye-based. So they are not 100% light fast, but they're pretty close. So that means that they are not going to fade unless you sit them in the direct sunshine for days on end. But they are, the main difference for me is with liquid watercolors, it's consistency. It's a level of consistency that I can achieve with the liquid watercolors because I know exactly how much is coming out. I know exactly what the pigments or the vibrancy of the pigments will look like when I drop that onto my palette. That is my biggest the biggest difference for me is being able to create those consistent color mixes, that consistent vibrancy of the watercolors with the liquid watercolors. Let's see, any more questions? Yes, dry pans do require water to activate. You have to have a damp paintbrush. I like to use my little dropper again for activating dry pans. But one thing that's nice about these liquid watercolors is that they are already wet. You don't have to, you can add as much water or as little water as you want to create those watercolor looks. I do not ever use a fixative spray. I have never used that. I spend a lot of time usually on my watercolor projects, and I've always been too nervous to put anything over the top of it. I know that they have those things, but I've never personally used them. I don't know, Heather, can you answer if Pinkfresh will start carrying the brushes? I'm going to say no, most likely not, because this is its own brand. But you never know. They carry all kinds of things in the Pinkfresh store. Okay, so we're going to do an ombre background. This is one of my favorite techniques to use with these liquid watercolors. And in the upcoming release, I have 3 different projects that I'm going to share on my blog with still photos of these different techniques that I'm sharing today. But so I'll have like actual finished projects for you, but this is just a quick demonstration. So with an ombre background, now ombre is, typically for me, it's 3 different colors that all fade nicely into one another on a background panel. So what I'm going to choose today, I'm going to choose 3 colors that will blend nicely and move nicely together so that there's not a kind of muddy mess. Again, avoid like pink and green, avoid purple and green, basically anything where you're avoid orange and green, that's going to create your mud. But if you choose colors that work nicely together because they have similar bases, so like bubblegum, clementine, and sunshine would work nicely together. This is from the Classics palette. These 3 will work nicely together because bubblegum is made with red. Clementine is made with red and yellow, so that will work nicely with the bubblegum. The red and that will blend nicely with the bubblegum. And sunshine is yellow, so it will work nicely with the yellow from the red and yellow of the clementine. So I'm just going to shake these up and add a generous dollop onto my palette. I'm just checking to see if there's any more questions. Okay. Nope, we're good. All right, so with an ombre background, there are times when I do wet on wet because I want the color to move nicely. The main technique with this is just making sure that you have enough water to keep your colors moving. Maybe I'll add in Raspberry Bliss as well as the bubble gum because that bubble gum is a little lighter. So we'll start with Raspberry Bliss, and I'm just going to make some stripes across the top of my paper. This is a fairly damp brush, but that Raspberry Bliss is very concentrated and very vibrant. So then I'm just going to kind of move, I cleaned off my brush, dabbed it on my stamp chamois, and I'm just going to move that color with the tip of my clean damp paintbrush. And that's going to create that movement. So now I've got, this is a nice area for me to transition into my lighter pink, which is the bubble gum. The Pinkfresh pinks, aptly named, are to die for. They are some of my favorite pinks in all of the wall of inks that I have and all of the color families that I have. So again, cleaning that brush, dabbing it on my stamp chamois, and moving that color with the tip of my clean damp paintbrush. So then I'm just gonna come back here, I've got a clean brush, and I'm gonna move these colors together so that they fade nicely into one another. And if I need to come back and add more, I can do that. Cleaning the brush, moving the color. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to Clementine. And this is going to be, the red in this will mix with the red in the bubble gum. You can see how they're transitioning nicely. And you just want to keep your strokes consistent, keeping your strokes horizontal will be the key to making sure that you have a nice fade in between. So that bubble gum is a little bit less vibrant than the Clementine. So we're just going to add some more. Just to try to get that color blend a little bit smoother. So now I'm going to add, this is Sunshine. And this to me looks like a really lovely sunset. Isn't that pretty? And I do have my watercolor paper taped down to my watercolor board. This is one of the boards my husband made for me. And I like to do that, especially when I am working with really saturated backgrounds. So when I'm going to be adding a lot of water to my background, I want to make sure that my paper is taped down, because as this dries, the paper will warp. The more water you add to your watercolor paper, the paper will kind of warp and get kind of uneven. So if you tape it down to your watercolor board, it will be flat as it dries. It will not have the option to curl. It will be completely flat as we dry. Okay, so I'm just going to keep kind of working this color until I get a fade that I am happy with. And this is, again, these colors reactivate with water. So I am able to maneuver this color very easily. Maneuver and intensify. And if you see your colors starting to move together too much, then clean your brush. Dip your brush in your water, dip it on your, or tap it on your stamp chamois and get that color, that excess color off. Now, something else you can do to help yourself with things like this is let gravity help you. Pull your brush or have your paper kind of at an angle so that gravity's pulling that color down. And I just kind of keep fussing with it until I'm happy with making sure that the colors blend smoothly into each other, making sure that there's no streaks. I'm gonna take a little bit of water into my Clementine and get a little bit more of a fade into the lemon. I'm sorry, I don't remember what color I used. Sunshine, not lemon. I was thinking lemon. But so you can see it's a very pretty, vibrant sunset background. And as this dries, it's going to flatten out. You can see, I don't know if you can see it, it's kind of bubbled up a little bit right here, but leave it taped on your board and it will be nice and smooth as it dries. Okay. So now I have one more little demonstration that I wanted to share with you today. This is one of my illustrations. This is the Wonderful in Every Way illustration. I thought this would be a good one because it's got a nice big flower to show you how I do some basic watercoloring on an image. Okay, so like I discussed with you earlier, let me go ahead and make sure that there's no more questions. Kelly asked if she leaves the watercolors on a palette will they stay wet if you put a plastic over it, or will it dry up? You know, I don't know. I've never tried putting them in like an airtight container to see if they will stay wet. My guess is that they would dry a little bit. They would, because when they dry, they kind of concentrate into, they you can almost see how the blue has started to kind of concentrate on here. And so it's very easily reactivated, but I don't know if you put it in an airtight container, what it would do. That's something that maybe someone can experiment and share with us on the Facebook page. Let's see. Beth asked, if a color dries and I go in layer and add a color next to it over it, will it blend or sit next to it? That's one of the things I want to show you. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna work with this this poppy image. So I have stamped this poppy image from the Wonderful in Every Way stamp set with the detail black ink from Pinkfresh. This is a really nice crisp black. I used my Misty to make sure that I got a really perfect impression, because as with any watercolor paper, when there's a little bit of texture on there, it's hard to get a completely 100% crisp impression the very first time you go in there. But I did find that the detail black, when we were testing these for when they were supposed to be released last year, we were doing some Better Press with them, and I used the liquid watercolors with the Better Press inks from Spellbinders, and I found that they did not play nicely together, whether it was Better Press or anything. So the detail black, you can use this with your Better Press plates, or you can use it with stamps, and it works wonderfully with the liquid watercolors. So that is another thing. Just, it's important to kind of experiment and figure out what inks play nicely together, what papers play nicely together. The more you play with your supplies, the better acquainted you will become, and the more comfortable you will be using them. Okay. Okay. All right. So let's do some watercoloring. I don't have this taped down to my background, or because I used up both of my boards for the other stuff. So we're just going to go with it. I'm going to use lavender from the past, or from, this is the Classics. I'm going to use lavender ink, lavender watercolor. I'm sorry, not lavender ink. I'm used to saying lavender ink because it's an ink pad. And I'm going to shake it a little bit. We'll have a lavender poppy. I don't know if that's a real thing, but we're going to go for it. Artistic license, right? Get plenty on my paper or on my palette. All right, so I'm cleaning my brush. This is my number 6 size brush. I could use the number 4 on this one very easily. But so I'm making sure that, again, the amount of water that you have on your paintbrush is the kicker. That's the key. You want to make sure that your paintbrush is fairly, I wouldn't say dry, but not very wet. Because once you have lots of water on your paintbrush, it's going to dilute that color. So if you were wanting that color to remain true, to remain consistent, as little water on your brush as possible to start. So I'm just going to lay down some color, clean my brush, dab it off. Again, not too much water, because that water, as we showed before with the blooming, it will spread. You don't want it to spread if you want to create these nice smooth fades from shadow into highlight. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go to an area, not this one and not this one right next to it. I'm going to rotate my paper, and I'm just going to go to a different area, because if these wet watercolors touch each other, they will bloom and you will lose your definition and your shadows and your nice light highlights. So I am making sure that there is not a ton of liquid on my brush, not a ton of water on my brush, so that I can move that watercolor very easily. And I'm just touching the tip of my watercolor brush to the edge of the line of watercolor that I have laid down. I have lots of videos on the Pinkfresh YouTube channel sharing different tips on how to watercolor, sharing different techniques on watercoloring. And I think I have at least 2 videos on these liquid watercolors also on the YouTube channel, the Pinkfresh YouTube channel. So if you have any, if you want to see more like this, you can check out the rest of the Pinkfresh YouTube channel. So just like with no line coloring, I'm kind of skipping a petal and going to the next one. That way my watercolors do not blend into each other and I lose that definition, okay? And the further I get away from the shadow, the lighter it becomes, the more diluted the color has become, and the less intense the highlight is. Okay. So we'll go over to this flower right now. This little bud. You know, I think there might actually be lavender poppies, but I think they might be a little bit more blue than this. I'm not 100%. Just like I am not a technological wizard, I'm a bad millennial. I am also not good with green things, which is why I draw and paint them instead. Okay, so this is very diluted for this area of this petal that is curled up. So one thing that you can also do with your watercolors, your liquid watercolors, you can put them down on your paper. And then see how I've got a little bit too much water on here, that color is kind of moving. It's very shiny. I've got very dry brush. It's called Thirsty Brush. I learned this from Dawn Woolslegel. And you just use it to kind of vacuum that color up. And you can even take your clean watercolor brush, rub it on there and kind of scrub it, cleaning it as you go. Every time you remove it from the paper, clean it and dab it dry. And you can almost, not 100%, but you can almost clean up that entire area. So if you make a mistake and you decide that you don't like that color, you didn't like the mixture, you can almost clean it up. Isn't that nice? Thirsty brush. It's a very, very valuable technique. All right, so now we're going to go back and work on the other petals. My damp brush, very, very lightly damp. And I'm just adding a little bit of color in this center of this petal because I want the edges to be nice and light. So I'm adding a little color here, and then I'm going to pull that color out with the edge of my damp paintbrush so that it fades nicely towards the edge of the petal and is not terribly concentrated. I do want a little bit more color here, so I'm going to add a little bit more in the center. And then again, I will pull that color out with my very lightly damp paintbrush to kind of blend and smooth out the edges. And you can use a heat gun to speed up the drying time, the drying process. My heat gun is at my other desk. This is my video desk. And so I only have my heat gun at the other desk. But you can absolutely do that and speed up the drying process. trying to go quickly because we're almost out of time. I've only got a few minutes left. I was afraid I wouldn't have enough stuff to talk about, but apparently I had plenty. Okay. I'm gonna turn around and zap this with my heat gun very quickly. To demonstrate how I can intensify this color a little bit. It's bone dry now, okay? So I'm going to take some of that raspberry bliss and stargazer mixture that we created earlier, and I'm going to mix that with the lavender to create a little bit more intense shadow. And I'm just going to place that here. Again, damp paintbrush, not wet, damp. The more water you have on there, the more easily you will lose your definition on your watercolor. You can see how that watercolor is spreading because that petal was still damp. So I use my thirsty brush to kind of push that color back towards the shadow where I want it, instead of pulling it away like I normally would. Adding this dark royal purple to the really shadowed petals adds to the contrast and the definition between the petals. Okay, let me see if I've got any questions in here since I'm running out of time. I don't know if I would say that it's better to heat set. I typically just allow things. Sandra asked if it was better to heat set it before going back to add extra layers of color. I don't typically hit it with my heat gun. I typically just allow it to dry organically. But if you're on a time crunch, it's totally fine. How dirty can your water be before you change it? If I was going to go and do another ombre background with pinks and yellows and stuff, because this water is kind of got a purple tinge to it, it would make the watercolor muddy looking. So that at that point, I would go and change the water to something cleaner. I just want to make sure I don't miss any questions, because we're getting close to when we're going to announce the watercolor winner of all 3 sets. I see some people going and subscribing to my channel, and I really, really appreciate that. I have 4 kids, and so doing videos for myself is a bit of a challenge at the moment. But I have been doing videos for the Pinkfresh YouTube channel for a couple of years now. So I have lots of videos on there, and not as many as I would like on my YouTube channel, but that's something that I'm going to hopefully work on once school starts again. I have 2 sets of twins who are rather noisy. Okay. I think I got all of the questions. So we'll just kind of, maybe Heather can choose a winner while I am doing a little bit more watercoloring, and then I will switch back over to my face. I put makeup on for you guys, just for you. I normally am rather barefaced during the summer. a little bit more of that darker purple. And again, the more you play with these, the more comfortable you will be with mixing, with how much water you need on your paintbrush. Brushes are a very personal preference. I know I've said this before. You almost have to try them out and see which kind of brushes you like. The silver black velvets are the ones that I've used for years, and I've tried other brands, and I always come back to these. So again, you have to play with your supplies. You have to use them. It's only paper if you mess up. And the more you use them, the more you play with them, the more comfortable you will be, and the better your projects will eventually get, because you are comfortable and you know your mediums inside and out. And just adding a little bit of color, very diluted lavender to those petals that are kind of curled over, because those are closest to the light, so they would be lighter. And I think I'll probably turn around and go back on my face. You guys get to see my face. I hope you've found this interesting. All right, so there is 10 minutes worth of watercoloring, but gives you an idea of how much lack of water you need for these liquid watercolors, because if you put too much water in there, it's going to bloom, it's going to move where you don't want it to, and you will lose your definition. So I'm going to flip around. Let's see. I just want to make sure that I am not missing any questions. Let's see. If Heather wants to announce the winner. So I have a lot of watercoloring mediums, and I have to say that it's always fun for me to get a chance to experiment with new coloring mediums. I think that's one of my favorite parts about this job that I have, is that I get the opportunity to play with things and share my tips and tricks with you guys. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me either on Instagram or on my blog, where I have an email me button. If you have any questions or want any product recommendations or anything like that, I'm happy to help with things like that. And I'm really excited for these watercolors, and I hope you guys are excited too, because the colors themselves are just so gorgeous. So let me see if Heather has announced. Amy Moore is the winner of the 3 sets of Pinkfresh liquid watercolors and a container of the paper. So yay, Amy. I just really want to thank you guys so much for joining me today. And if you are watching on replay, thank you so much for watching on replay. If you wanted to give us a thumbs up and a share or hit the subscribe button, that would be really, really awesome. We love sharing crafty content with you guys, and I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to play with you guys today, and I hope you enjoyed and learned something. So I guess that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message or an email. I'm always happy to help. So thanks so much for watching. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.